It was a conflict that created a nightmarish wound in the Force. It was a war which brought forth Revan, one of the galaxy's greatest heroes, only to make him fall in the end. It was a struggle that lasted 16 years, and yet is only spoken of in tearful memories and broken anecdotes. This is the Mandalorian Wars. In 3976 BBY, the once Sith-aligned Mandalorians returned to the Republic with a vengeance. Led by Mandalore the Ultimate, they would cut a swath of destruction in the Outer Rim, committing atrocities against sentient life. But for most of the war, the peacekeeping Jedi Knights were nowhere to be found. That wasn't until Revan would take charge, rising to become one of the most famous and most infamous Jedi in history. But despite how impactful the Mandalorian Wars were, they unfortunately only serve as the backdrop to Revan's story, falling in the shadows of the Jedi Civil War. But the Mandalorian Wars might be one of the most important events in galactic history. It showed what happens when Jedi are at their worst, and too afraid to help the Republic that they swore to protect. It also resulted in the most monumental shift in the Mandalorian culture since their very inception. In today's video, we are going to decrypt all of the flashbacks and trauma stories that bring together a complete timeline for the Mandalorian Wars in a brand new documentary. A grudge match that would cost the Mandalorians, the Jedi, and the Republic nearly everything. The cost of war is great, but luckily, the cost of learning about it is very little. In our archives, we strive to bring you the best lore as often as possible. So if you end up enjoying this deep dive, then force crush that subscribe button and join our order today. Now, my friends, let us begin. Chapter 1: Born of Blood. In this era of the Old Republic, there were 4 major conflicts that all ran through one another, just as the Mandalorian Wars later instigated the Jedi Civil War, and the Dark Wars after that. It was the Great Sith War that began it all. In 3996 BBY, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma would wage a war that nearly brought the Republic and the Jedi to their knees. Fighting alongside these Sith Lords were the Mandalorian Crusaders. Led by Mandalore the Indomitable, they had first believed that it was their time to go on a campaign to define their people. After witnessing his strength, Mandalore the Indomitable challenged Ulic Qel-Droma to a duel. The Sith Lord triumphed, but instead of killing the Mandalore, he had Indomitable swear fealty to him and render the services of his warriors to the Sith. Mandalore agreed and spent the remainder of his life completely loyal to Ulic. But once the Great War came to a close, the Jedi managed to turn the tables against Exar Kun. Qel-Droma had his power stripped from him and was redeemed back to the light side. Exar Kun was officially defeated at Yavin 4, and the Mandalorians' attack on Onderon ended in disaster. Mandalore the Indomitable escaped to the demon moon of Duxun, where he was then torn apart by its dark side-empowered savage beasts. For the Mandalorians, this war was a disgrace. They had been promised much by Indomitable, and were led to glory, only for it to come crashing all down around them. All because of the Jedi. But their hour to restore their honor would come, when another soldier would find the ruined body of Indomitable and claim the mask of Mandalore for his own. The Mask of Mandalore was a symbol of leadership among the other Mandalorian clans. It had been the very first mask carved by the very man who had founded their current way of life. The unknown soldier of Duxun would claim the title of Mandalore the Ultimate. Real quick, there is a bit of historical conjecture here, as it is not fully known whether this man was the one who features in this video. There were some who believed that Mandalore the Ultimate that we know actually usurped the mask and the title from this soldier. Years later, a man emerged claiming that he was the true Mandalore, the one who had the mask and the title stolen from him. Of course, while it's impossible to know, we have our suspicions. It's unlikely that any Mandalorian worth his salt would claim the mask and title from another without dueling them to the death first. And Mandalore the Ultimate turned out to be quite the warrior who highly valued honor. So in our opinion, these claims are unfounded, and it's most likely that the other guy is lying. We believe the soldier who claimed the mask on the moon had to have been the first and only Mandalore the Ultimate. Anyway, 2 decades would go by before there was any real noise. This would be what the Republic would call the Restoration Period. The Great Sith Wars had left much of the galaxy in ruin. Several worlds were nothing but rubble, and the Jedi Order itself was about as organized as a stomped out anthill. Exar Kun had severely weakened them, formulating his own version of the Jedi Purge. His followers dispatched out in the galaxy to kill their former masters, a display that was meant to serve as an act of loyalty to the Sith Brotherhood. This mass death caused the Jedi to lose many old masters who held secrets of balance to the Force and the right way to live and function as a Jedi. On top of this, the original Jedi homeworld of Ossus had been almost completely destroyed. Eons of knowledge was lost when the Great Ossus Library was leveled by a supernova. The Jedi were now having to rebuild themselves on the world of Dantooine, starting basically from square one. They now no longer allowed their Jedi to have their own lives and families on other worlds, but all had to stay together in the Enclave. Each Jedi Knight and Master that remained were trying to deal with the trauma of the past, attempting to raise a new generation, and they had very few Masters of the past to guide them. The Republic itself was having to conserve its energy and resources in order to heal. This meant that its authority and presence in the Outer Rim was purely theoretical, leaving most of the Rimward worlds completely undefended. To restore the Republic's economy and infrastructure, a group of politicians decided to come up with a helpful idea. They went to various corporations in the galaxy and guaranteed them safe trade along the hyperlanes. In exchange, they would receive commercial investments in the Republic. As a result, the Republic was able to rebuild its military and economy, supplying much-needed goods to the rest of the galaxy. Once again, hyperspace explorers could take to the stars and resume exploration to discover new routes. However, some groups would take advantage of the Republic's kindness for their own profit. Such was a criminal enterprise known as the Exchange, and many corporate entities such as the Loshan Industries. They would bribe the Republic senators into admitting the world of Terrace into the Republic. Terrace was a city planet in the Outer Rim, much like Coruscant, a planet that once served as an important trade world to the northern side of the galaxy. The Exchange had a vested interest in Terrace, so they made sure that it got a seat in the Republic Senate, thereby giving them power in the Senate as well. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians, rather than return to their homeworld, would continue a nomadic lifestyle. Their clans united under Ultimate's leadership and rebuilt their ranks, growing strong and formidable once more. Mandalore was then approached by a scientist by the name of Antos Weirick, who had once been apprenticed to Ultimate's forebearer, Mandalore the Indomitable. Weirick had been experimenting on a sample collected from the legendary Jedi Master Arca Jeth. The mad scientist believed that he could genetically engineer Force wielders, using them as a sort of Mandalorian Jedi. Mandalore the Ultimate agreed with this wild plan, and Weirick began the New Generation project on the world of Osadai. There, he sought to produce Force-sensitive children to be raised as weapons for the Mandalorians. They would once again call on their Sith ties in order to help facilitate children for this project. Long before, during the Old Empire, a Sith Lord by the name of Leldis founded a slaving organization known as the Crucible. Millennia after his death, this sinister slaving company was still active. At first, Weirick used their services to acquire children for this project. However, in 3988 BBY, everything would end in disaster when the Crucible dug into their treacherous Sith roots and would raid the Osadaya school. They kidnapped all of the students and destroyed the laboratory. Weirick was unable to recover his students after years of searching, and ultimately rejoined the Mandalorians as their chief scientist. There, he spent his days torturing and experimenting on captured Jedi, hoping to discover the source of their power. Antos Weirick became known as the Demigol, a derivative of the Mando's language that translates into flesh carver. Moving on in the timeline, in 3978 BBY, the gears of the war finally begin turning. Mandalore the Ultimate would be secretly approached by yet another tie to their Sith past, but this time, it was an actual member of the original Sith pure-blooded species. Away from all other eyes, the Sith introduced himself as an emissary of a powerful Dark Lord, and enlisted Mandalore's help in locating the tomb of his master's old rival, a Sith by the name of Dramath II. Mandalore and the emissary found the tomb on the planet of Rekiad, and in return for his help, the emissary informed Ultimate of a vision that his master had. He said that in the vision, the master saw the Mandalorians sweeping across the Republic, conquering many worlds before ultimately crushing the Republic in a final victory. Mandalore was pleased, and saw this as a divine sign that it was time to launch his campaign. But unbeknownst to him, he was being manipulated through the Force. This emissary had tricked him. All of these events had been engineered by none other than Darth Vitiate, Emperor of the Hidden Sith Empire. He desired to use the Mandalorians as a weapon to test the Republic's forces. and ultimate fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Now under Vitiate's spell, Mandalore the Ultimate returned to his men and began preparation for war. He first told them of the divine revelation that they would succeed, but to give them their best possible chance, he made several reforms to their Mandalorian culture. Firstly, now in Mandalorian culture, they would open their arms to humans and other species that proved themselves in battle and upheld the warrior's code. Heretofore, the Mandalorians had only been made up of the Tong species. They were the ones who were originally cast out of Coruscant by ancient humans, sent to the stars to search for a new home. But now, they were accepting non-Tongs into their ranks. This officially changed the Mandalorians from a people to a creed. This single reform bolstered their ranks immensely, as mercenaries joined en masse looking for a place and a home to belong. The next reform was that they would no longer pillage worlds, simply move on to the next target. Instead, they would hold their territories, construct an actual society based on the Mandalorians' code. Mandalore's new vision of society was one where warriors would rule and be supported by farmers, artisans, and manufacturers, those who accepted the Mandalorian way. Arising from all of this was Cassius Fett, the first ever recorded Fett in Mandalorian history. He would rise through the ranks quickly, eventually becoming a field marshal and then lieutenant of Mandalore the Ultimate. Together, Cassius Fett and Mandalore would form the Neo Crusader movement, the successors to Indomitable's Crusaders. Rather than being a band of raiders, the Neo Crusaders were shaping up to be a much more organized and a militaristic fighting force. Fett spearheaded this movement in Mandalore's name, becoming the top commander and strategist. For the next 2 years, they put together a fleet of warships at Breshing and Arda, utilizing vast caches of war material stolen during the Sith Wars. They would also carry over their Basilisk war mounts to continue paying homage to Indomitable's original Crusaders. The Basilisk war droid were one of the most iconic weapons of the old Mandalorians. They were large, semi-sentient flying droids that had the minds and natures of a beast. Despite being artificial though, they could form powerful empathetic bonds with their riders, and were known to howl with pain when their riders perished in battle. They were heavily armored, equipped with pulse wave cannons, auto-firing laser cannons, and 2 different kinds of missile launchers. Instead of a face, they had a cluster of shockwave generator rods that, when fired together, were capable of ripping through hulls of starships. They were the perfect hybrid machine that could battle across land, atmosphere, and even the vacuum of space. This one weapon was one of the keys to the Mandalorians' great success, and they had thousands of them. With the evolution of the Mandalorians accepting more species, Neo Crusaders would also develop a new type of armor that would fit a variety of different races. This would give rise to the distinctive Neo Crusader light armor. This name is a bit of a misnomer though. The light armor weighed almost 93 pounds, or 42 kilograms, but it was considered light by Mandalorian standards. The heavy variant was the Neo Crusader assault armor, worn by the elite shock troopers. These sets would be around 143 pounds, or 65 kilograms. Neo Crusader light armors had a couple of functions and attributes superior to the former Crusader armor, most notably that it was much stronger and could withstand more force. The first armor was sort of the first time we saw what we traditionally know as Mandalorian armor begin to take form, but it was primitive. This version too would include a helmet with an internal comlink and a stealth field generator that allowed warriors to vanish from sight and appear and launch new ambushes. The suits were also sealed, including enough oxygen to provide 10 hours of breathable air in a vacuum. Some were also equipped with jetpacks. This was an era when Mandalorian iron, or Beskar, was beginning to be used in a more widespread sense. All standard infantry units were outfitted with these armors as per ritual, making the entire Neo Crusader army extremely formidable. They were also outfitted with a wide variety of weaponry, those that included all manner of advanced blasters available at the time, but they also didn't shy away from traditional weaponry either. Mandalorians were known to craft Beskar melee weapons such as battle axes, spears, cowl knives, and even swords, known to them as Beskade, which they intended to use against Jedi. One weapon that may have also been used were crush gaunts. It's difficult to track down the origins of this weapon, and we can't exactly confirm whether the Neo Crusaders had them or not, but we thought we would mention them anyway. Crush gaunts were an armored glove made from a reactive fabric that exponentially enhanced the natural hand strength of its wearer. True to its name, they were used to collapse throats, crush skulls, and shatter bone. Due to it being made with micronized Beskar, the wearer of a crushed gaunt could easily catch and hold a lightsaber blade in one's palm. With their new weaponry, the Mandalorians could now operate on an even level with their old nemesis. Their attacks began light, with no Republic resistance in the Outer Rim. The Mandalorians then moved freely through the Tion cluster and began harassing outlying systems in Hutt space. This would only be the testing of the waters, while their real force grew in power elsewhere. The time for their glorious revenge was at hand, and this brings us to Chapter 2. Lacerating the Republic. The full conflict kicked off in 3976 BBY, when Mandalore the Ultimate began raiding the unprotected systems in the Outer Rim. The first world they hit was Althir 3. The world managed to hold off the Mandalorians for a total of 5 days, until they were broken by the actions of a young Candaris Ordo. He had been tasked with feinting against one of the enemy flanks in order to draw the Althiri out of formation. However, Ordo saw an opening in the enemy ranks and took the initiative, forcing the Althiri to fend off assaults on 2 sides, exposing their vulnerable command ships. Ordo's forces quickly eradicated the Aetheri fleet, which was 10 times the size of their own. As a reward, Candaris got command over an entire subsect of his clan. The Mandalorians spent some time doing what Ultimate had decreed, establishing an industrial settlement and inducting the world into the Mandalorian war machine. But 3 years later, the Neo Crusaders would attack the world of Cathar, where they would commit a disgusting atrocity that they would soon come to regret. Cassius Fett led the Battle of Cathar, where he directed his forces to herd the defenseless native population deep into the ocean. There, he ordered his men to massacre the civilians. A single Mandalorian woman stood against this order and stepped in between the Cathar and the Crusaders. She tried to talk reason to her brothers and Cassius Fett, but when none of them budged, Fett ordered them to open fire, killing the woman alongside the innocents. Basilisk war droids swept across the world, killing the remaining population. Only a few hundred survived, with over 90% of the Cathar population dying during this genocide. This would be the event that showed the brutality of the Mandalorians, and the lengths that they were willing to go to in order to show their strength. News of the Cathar massacre eventually reached the Republic, but it fell on deaf ears. In an unforgivable moment, the Republic suppressed the news of the event so that it would not cause panic to their citizens. Not even the Jedi were made aware. You see, both the Republic and the Jedi at this point were unwilling to go fight the Mandalorians. They were enjoying the years of peace brought on by the Restoration period, and were too weak and too afraid to wage another war. The toll taken upon them and the galaxy by Exar Kun was immense, and they feared plunging themselves into yet another conflict that would spell doom for an already weakened Republic. And so, while they mobilized the Navy to guard Duxun and Terrace, they ultimately did nothing. For 8 years, the Mandalorians continued to slash away at the Outer Rim, while the Republic sluggishly responded, never fully committing to fighting their new enemy. Tearing their way up and down the Perlemian trade route and the Overic Griplink hyperlane, they conquered a total of 12 entire systems. Many were Republic-owned, but others were Hutt-owned. Unlike most enemies of the Republic, the Mandalorians were not afraid to tangle with the Hutt or other crime lords. Anytime the Hutt sent armies of mercenaries to fight, the Mandalorians would frequently just recruit them into their ranks with great success. Their raids were progressing in their favor, and there was no one to stop them. But soon, the Republic would be forced to respond when the Mandalorians geared up to stab into the Mid-Rim. In the year 3966 BBY, Terrace's resource world of Jebel, Vanquo, Tarnith, Surja, they were all under threat by the Neo Crusaders. They were preparing to take Terrace, since the city world would serve as a great staging ground for a mid-rim campaign. The Republic would bolster their navy around those worlds, forming a line of defense to warn the Mandalorians to come no further. In command of the fleets were Admirals Veltra and Somos. By 3965 BBY, their progress had come to a grinding halt, as the Mandalorians finally met a reasonable amount of Republic resistance. For 8 months, they poked and prodded at the worlds along the Terrace line. They managed to capture the world of Flashpoint, inheriting the Flashpoint Stellar Research Station as a result. There, Demigul resumed his sinister research, and brought all captured Jedi to the station for experimentation. The Mandalorians saw battle with the Republic 3 times at Sorja, but they were all largely inconclusive. Veltra and Somos worked together to keep the Mandos at arm's length, at least for the time being. This year would become known as the False War, as the true fighting had not yet fully begun outside of the skirmishes that surrounded Taris. It was amidst this false war that a charismatic young Jedi began making waves in the Order. He called for the Knights of the Old Republic to intervene in the Mandalorian conflict, to have them retaliate, to regain lost territory for the Republic's sake. The young Jedi's views were met with hostility and suspicion from the High Council. They were wary for the reasons that both the Republic was, but also because they could sense the dark side at play. They had only just exited the war with Exar Kun, and did not want more of their young Jedi going off to fight in a new war. Encouraged by the Master Kreia, the young Jedi, however, began to openly challenge the High Council, and gathered his friend Alec and a following of like-minded Jedi. This movement famously became known as the Revanchists, and their leader was branded the Jedi's own Crusader, by the Republic media no less. Defying the High Council's wishes, the young Jedi led Alec and the Revanchists on a scouting mission to the battlefront. They stopped at Taris, hoping to find and recruit some Jedi along the way who were stationed on the planet's Jedi Tower. Afterward, they made off to Sorja. This is where the real fighting was. However, the Crusader left his followers on Sorja, hoping to investigate Mandalorian activity on Onderon and Duxun. This had dire consequences for the Revanchists, as they were left unprepared for a Mandalorian ambush. Captured, Alec and the other Revanchists were taken to the Flashpoint Research Station, where Demagol tortured and experimented on them. The strong Jedi presence on Taris had heretofore deterred the Mandalorians from making a strong push. But everything in the war would change following a scandalous event known as the Padawan Massacre, where a group of 5 Jedi Masters slaughtered each one of their Padawans. In truth, they were all a part of a third-party organization known as the Covenant, who swore to keep the Sith from returning at all and any cost. They had a vision of one of their Padawans having a hand in the return of the Sith, and so, in order to ensure that the Order survived, killed them all. Only Master Lucian Dre's Padawan, Zane Carrick, survived. Once the Padawan murders were made public, Carrick was framed for them and pursued by the Taris police force. The Jedi failed to capture Zane, and he escaped off-world. This caused mass rioting and panic in the streets of Taris, as the entire planet began rapidly losing faith in the Jedi. Certain companies, like Losan Industries that we mentioned at the beginning of the video, were considering pulling their support for the Republic after witnessing how ineffectual the Jedi really were. The whole ordeal caused the High Council to recall the Jedi Covenant Masters back to Coruscant. The Jedi withdrawing from Taris left it vulnerable. Taking advantage of the situation, the Mandalorians finally made their big play. Mandalore the Ultimate overwhelmed the Republic Navy on Vanquo, ending the 8-month stalemate and breaking the Republic's defense line. By 3,963 BBY, the Mandalorians were besieging Taris. The Republic fleet under command of Admiral Veltra formed a desperate defense line around the city planet. But the Mandalorians targeted his flagship first, and Admiral Velta would perish before he could properly mount any defense. Admiral Somos was gravely injured, and had to be evacuated to the planet of Wayland. Without their brave commanders, the defense line of Taris disintegrated, and the Mandalorians rained fire upon the city planet. Their dreadnoughts bombarded the planet for weeks, and invaded in droves. Taris's meager planetary security force was barely holding up, prompting criminal swoop gangs, such as the Hidden Becks, to form their own resistance and fight back against the Mandos. Meanwhile, the Revanchist leader was working on finding a way to liberate his Jedi followers from Flashpoint. He was aided by the falsely accused fugitive Zane Carrick, who managed to outwit the Mandalorians at the orbital station. He convinced them that the Republic was booby-trapping their ships, which forced the Mandos to flee. Carrick then rescued his friend, who had been in the prison, and the Jedi Crusader was reunited with his fellow Revanchists. Unfortunately though, the mad scientist Demagol had managed to escape custody, and although the Revanchists tried to bring him to justice, he had switched armors with another Mandalorian leader, and so they took in the wrong individual. Not long after this, the Revanchists continued their campaign against the Mandalorians. The public was so thankful to have Jedi intervention that they began to paint the leader as a crusading savior, one who was wrongfully ignored by the High Council. Soon, the Crusader became a celebrity and was simply known as the Revanchist. He continued to travel the galaxy, taking out cells of Mandalorian invaders and spreading the news of his mission to the wider stars. At this time, the Revanchists hadn't been integrated with the Republic Navy yet, and so they had no command. All they could do was operate independently, calling as many Jedi around the galaxy to action as they could. And because the Council was working against them, it continued to stifle any progress in the Republic's defense against the Mandalorians. In the Mandalorian camp, Ultimate was now ready to make bigger moves on the Republic. So far, they had attacked and conquered a great deal of the Outer Rim territory, each one seeming to be small pickings, but collectively, they formed a noose around the Republic's neck. Now all of the Mandos had to do was tighten it. As they besieged Taris, the Mandalorians also began attacking the Republic in a three-pronged attack, one that took them to the west, east, and straight downward. This offensive maneuver would come to be known as the Onslaught. The Mandalorians cut west along the Outer Rim and took the Zongulu system before felling Ord Mantell. Ithor was next, but a Republic counterattack with the support of Zabrak military units repelled their forces. Seeing the Zabrak support, the Mandalorians attacked their homeworld of Iridonia. This time, they were successful and conquered the planet. They held on to Iridonia for quite some time, gaining new recruits in the process. Eventually, though, Republic and Zabrak forces liberated the planet, but a Mandalorian presence remained behind. The second of the three-pronged attack took on an invasion corridor east to Wayland. They bombed the surface, wiping out colonists and factories in a wave of destruction. The third corridor was a spike stabbing straight towards the core. They first captured Jebel, which was behind Taris, building a warforge on the ice planet that supplied their offensives. This also served as a staging point for a planned attack on the world of Alderaan. But between Jebel and Alderaan were two other worlds, Seriko and Omanoth. While this was going on, Mandalore the Ultimate decided to also settle an old score. His predecessor, Mandalore the Indomitable, had been destroyed on Alderaan and slain on its moon. And so, to amend this past mistake, the Neo Crusaders struck this world and besieged the walled city of Iziz, utilizing their Basilisk war mounts. In a blaze of glory, they avenged Indomitable and the original Crusaders by conquering Alderaan and the demon moon of Duxun. Now things had changed. The Republic went into full panic mode. They dispatched their entire navy to combat the Mandalorian threat. There was no more ignoring them. The core worlds were in real danger, and the time to fight had come. What remained of the Outer Rim fleets fell back to the core, and the recently appointed Rear Admiral Kareth was designated to protect the planet of Seriko. Kareth's forces set up camps right next to the stone cities of the native Sturib, and the fleet formed up in a defensive formation around the planet. However, Ultimate viewed this tactic as a defense without honor, as it assumed that the Mandalorians would not attack the civilian cities. And so, he decided that he would teach the Republic a devastating lesson. Padawan Zane Carrick had also been on Seriko during this time, and had a foreboding vision about the coming attack. He snuck aboard the ship of Lieutenant Karth Onasi in order to reach Kareth and to warn him. However, the Admiral refused to believe Carrick, thinking that he was a Mandalorian spy. He ordered Karth Onasi to arrest Carrick, but right then, the Neo Crusader fleet exited hyperspace. Admiral Kareth raised the shields to engage the fleet, but to his shock, the Mandalorians launched nuclear warheads, those that swerved around the Republic ships to slam into Seriko's surface. The warheads impacted 27 population centers, wiping out most of the Stereb cities. The devastation caught most of the Republic ships on the surface by surprise, destroying all but 8 of them. Jedi all across the galaxy felt the simultaneous deaths of thousands in the Force, causing a tremendous disturbance. Fortunately, the native Stereb people, Karth Onasi, had been able to call down emergencies to at least 17 of the cities. This led inhabitants of the settlements to take shelter in the underground catacombs, surviving the nuclear apocalypse. Onasi not only saved the lives of thousands, but he also let Zane Carrick go free, pretending to lose him. Kareth's forces slowly retreated towards the core as they came under attack by the Mandalorians. They hoped to converge with another Republic group near the Reich Nebula, but were rerouted by Ultimate's forces. The Neo Crusader shock troopers boarded Kareth's command ship, and a battle took place inside. Zane Carrick again heroically helped Onasi and Kareth escape, but Serrico was lost. Mandalore the Ultimate would melt down Kareth's ship, ironically named the Courageous, and smelt part of the hull into a new battle axe that he forged. The next major event would be an odd battle on the world of Amanoth. Lord Adaska of the Adaska Biomechanical Corporation weaponized the enormous space creatures known as the Exogorths. Adaska believed that his army of enhanced Exogorths made him a galactic power, and arranged for them to be auctioned off in the Amanoth system. He contacted representatives of all of the major players in the war, Admiral Kareth of the Republic, Mandalore the Ultimate, and the Revanchists. The Jedi leader, however, was unable to attend in person, so he sent Alec in his stead, with orders to do whatever was necessary to eliminate the danger that they now faced. During the auction, Admiral Kareth offered Adaska a seat on the Senate, but Mandalore countered with the offer of making Adaska Corps the sole weapons manufacturer of the Mandalorians. However, Adaska quickly became power-hungry and declared himself to be a new galactic power. With this declaration, his auction came crashing down as Zane Carrick and the Jedi worked together to sabotage it. They convinced Mandalore that the whole thing was a trap set for him, which led to a massive fight breaking out between the Republic, the Mandalorians, Adaska's people, and the Jedi. The entire affair devolved into chaos and resulted in the Mandalorians destroying Adaska's entire operation. Not long following the Battle of Amanoth, the Mandalorians advanced from their western position of the Wayland to Merkur. They won the battle and continued their path of destruction to the world of Thustra and Obra Sky. But although the Republic was suffering heavy casualties, they managed to secure a full set of Neo Crusader armor to study for weaknesses. The advance of the Mandalorians seemed unstoppable at the time, but they were forced to halt their campaign due to the problems arriving on the world of Jebel. An ancient Sith artifact known as the Mur Talisman was uncovered by Mandalorian scientists. This talisman was created by one of the very first Lords of the Sith, Karnus Mur. It was possessed with his spirit, and had the ability to turn any creature it infected into a monstrous beast known as a Rakghoul. A Jedi Shadow by the name of Celeste Morn was corrupted by it, and went on a bloody rampage, corrupting hundreds of Mandalorians, which caused a plague to take over the entire world. Eventually, Zane Carrick was able to bring Celeste back to her senses, and she was placed in a stasis casket until they could find a way to destroy the talisman and find a cure for the plague. They then escaped Jebel just in time for Cassis Fett to arrive on the world. Fett's forces decided to bombard the surface with nuclear warheads, annihilating all of the Rakghouls and infecting Mandalore soldiers. This massive loss would put a stop to the Mandalorians' core world offensive, buying the Republic valuable time. All of this chaos, death, and rampaging of the Mandalorians would finally bring us to the final chapter of this war, a chapter that we have decided to call Chapter 3, The Rise of Revan. Soon, the sins of the Mandalorians would begin to catch up with them. One of the Revanchist's followers, a Cathar Jedi, brought to his attention that the Cathar species was absent from their homeworld. The leader pivoted the group's activities into an investigation of the world of Cathar, searching for the source of their disappearance. They spent a while looking around the planet, before the Jedi Council arrived in the Force to confront the Revanchists. Sick of being disobeyed, the Council was now going to force them to stand down or face the consequences. This came when Master Vandar Tokare had a vision of a great destruction that would soon come. However, the Council misinterpreted the vision. It had been pointing them to the Jedi Civil War, but they believed it was a warning against going to battle with the Mandalorians. The Council warned the Revanchist leader and his followers that the Mandalorians were nothing special and to disband immediately, otherwise they would be placed under arrest. But this meeting was interrupted when the leader discovered a Mandalorian mask in the water that they were standing in. As he lifted the mask, every Jedi present suddenly shared a vision of the past. They witnessed Cassis Fett herd the defenseless Cathar into the ocean and massacre them. This came despite protests of the Mandalorian woman, whose mask had now just been found. Disgusted by the genocide, the Jedi leader donned the woman's mask in her honor and declared himself a brand new name, Revan. He announced that he would not remove the mask until the Mandalorians were brought to justice and her life avenged. In light of this vision, the Jedi High Council begrudgingly sanctioned the Revanchists' official intervention in the war. However, they continued to publicly denounce Revan's actions. Revan soon came up with a solution that appeased the Council and allowed the Revanchists to officially join the war effort. He revived the idea of the Mercy Corps from the Sith War, in which the Jedi were deputized to serve alongside the Republic military, but allegedly only as simple healers. The Council reluctantly agreed to Revan's request, and his followers, now an official Mercy Corps, began to work alongside the Republic Navy. Overjoyed, the High Command of the Republic appointed Revan and Alec, who now was going by the name Malak, as generals. In the months that would follow, the Revanchists joined the Republic in battling the Mandalorians openly now. No longer did they have to operate in the shadows as vigilantes. They now had the full ability to command armies, direct navies, and publicly engage as the peacekeepers of the Republic. Revan proved himself a capable military leader, winning several victories against the Mandalorians, and his followers marched proudly under his new banner. His fame spread to the Republic forces, and they were bolstered by a sudden surge of courage in their new champion. With the Jedi rolling at full force now, the Mandalorians decided to bring forth a brand new type of soldier. By the year 3962 BBY, another player would make himself known in the conflict. Dorjander Case. This was a man who once served on the Jedi High Council, but was removed from his seat when he fell in love with none other than a Mandalorian woman. He had become disillusioned with the Republic and had joined the cause in favor of the Mandos. Believing that he could reform them, Case would form a faction known as the Mandalorian Knights, a group of like-minded Jedi who fought alongside the Neo Crusaders against the Republic. It took Dorjander quite a bit of convincing for the Mandos to accept Jedi within their ranks, however. He acknowledged that the Mandalorians win with arms and looked down on the Jedi's tricks and magic. But Case assured them that his Jedi believed in a fair fight rather than a corrupt republic. And for a while at least, he convinced the stubborn Mandalorians that having their own Jedi would set the balance right. Mandalore the Ultimate had already toyed with the idea of using Force sensitives before. That had, after all, been the entire mission of his chief scientist, Demagol. Dorjander Case developed a plan to kidnap younglings from the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, and his plan was approved by Ultimate, who agreed to let Case train them on the planet of Ordo. With Mandalore's support, Case continued the campaign on the northern edge of the galaxy, luring the Republic into an attack on Essene. The Republic was, as of now, unaware of Case's defection, so he and his Mandalorian Knights led the Republic forces, including Zane Carrick, in a large charge against the Mandalorian bastion underneath Mount Savage. But this whole battle was nothing more than a stage play. The Mandalorian Knights turned on the Republic's men and eliminated them so quickly that none of them could get a message out to warn High Command. Once again, this placed the responsibility of saving the war effort on the unwilling shoulders of Zane Carrick. Dorjander Case and his Mandalorian Knights led their forces in a campaign northward towards Dantooine. They assaulted a signal station on Hathor on the way, and Case threatened Zane's home planet to force the Jedi into helping his plan. The Mandalorian Knights were able to land on Dantooine, and they took control of the Enclave. Zane Carrick, however, leapt into action to save the younglings. He destroyed the ship on which Case intended to extract the younglings, and they were evacuated to another Republic vessel. Zane and Dorjander Case dueled in the Enclave, but Case soon learned that the Mandalorians had decided to cut their losses and withdraw all support from him. Carrick managed to convince the former Jedi Master to surrender, and he and his knights were officially put on trial. Although Case preached for 9 hours straight to the Jedi, speaking of righteousness and the Mandalorian cause, he was formally thrown into prison. Meanwhile, in the rest of the galaxy, the war entered a phase known as the Mandalorian Triumph, a campaign that first saw the Mandalorians conquer the border world of Eris III and set fire to the planet's plains. This act drove Revan's lieutenant, Mitra Surik, and her forces from the world. The Mandalorians made another plunge for the core, conquering both the Darnatine system and the Cheros system. They attempted to continue, gaining the strategically valued Randon system where they would be rebuffed by Revan's forces. Changing tactics and directions, the Mandalorians sliced through 11 more systems, driving their dagger deeper into the Republic's heart. At some point, they also attacked the Tibanna mining planet of Bespin. The Mandos destroyed most of the mining operations in orbit of the world, hoping to break the Republic's supply of Tibian gas. This was important for powering ships and blasters. And apparently, there was also fighting somewhere in the deep core, near the Empress Tita system. There, the Mandos attacked a Jedi-owned hospital, hoping to cut off medical aid on the front lines of the core. Finally, they managed to attack the world of Duro, officially placing their forces in the core worlds. The shipyards and cities of Duros were devastated by the Basilisk war droids, all in an effort to cut off the Corellian trade spine. However, Revan, Malak, and Mitra all arrived in time to save the Battle of Durin. They Deus Ex Machina'd on the scene, wielding a fleet of Indictor-class cruisers, thereby stopping the Mandalorians from escaping with war material stolen from the Duros shipyards. Bowing to the Republic's pressure though, Chancellor Tol Kressa appointed Revan as the supreme commander of the Republic's military. Many in the Republic believed that Revan was their only savior in this crisis, and were ready to give him as much power and loyalty as he wanted. In the course of the years 3961 to 3960 BBY, Revan took the offensive to the Mandalorians for the first time in the war. The entire time, the Republic had been on the back foot, defending, retreating, holding, and giving ground. But now, Revan was actually directing them into a successful counter, and he did so with such viciousness that it would later alter history and his mind. His first target was liberating Taris, which ended the lengthy siege and occupation of the city planet. Revan himself spearheaded the charge, leading a group of Jedi into battle in Taris' Undercity. While there, Revan freed a group of slaves who were about to be sold on the market by the exchange. Even the underdwellers of Taris began to know the Jedi's name, speaking it softly, Revan. His tactical prowess saw the Republic achieve victory upon victory. This repulsed the Mandalorians with tenacity, and when Mandalore the Ultimate shoved, Revan would push back even harder. The Mandalorian officer Candaris Ordo would later say this: "It was not your ships, or your men, or your vaunted fight for freedom that won this, the final battle of the war. It was by the actions of one person, the Jedi Revan, that you prevailed. His strategies and tactics defeated the best of us. Even Mandalore himself was taken aback by the ferocity of his attacks, the tenacity of his defenses, and the subtleties of his plans. But as masterfully as Revan was fighting, it was not without great cost. Revan began co-opting the ruthless tactics of the Mandalorians to use against them. He became increasingly willing to sacrifice populations, key worlds in order to sustain victories elsewhere, and he understood that the Republic's industrial might was its key to victory. Revan churned out more and more machines of war, beating the Neo Crusaders at their very own game. At the same time, he and Malak and the Revanchists continued to adopt victory by any cost, a new philosophy. Moral shortcuts became increasingly more common under Revan's command. This earned him the grudging respect of the Mandalorians, and the growing contempt of the Jedi High Council. But even the Council reluctantly admitted that the cold-hearted strategy was massively successful. But while during these campaigns, Revan and Malak would stumble across a piece of ancient technology on the world of Dantooine, the Star Map. The Star Map was a piece of a long-lost Rakatan relic, one that led to a superweapon known as the Star Forge. Malak and Revan then discovered other star maps on the worlds of Kashyyyk and Korriban, but they kept this knowledge to themselves for the time. Revan would continue making journeys to other Sith planets to see what he could learn. This led him to Malachor V, and there he discovered the Treyas Academy. This was a temple of Sith learning, which was technically still active with assassins inhabiting its halls. Revan began to be seduced by the dark side of the Force, as he learned from the Academy's stores of knowledge. He then passed on the forbidden fruit to his friend Malak, and the two decided to wield the dark side to their advantage to win the war. But they did not renounce their ways as the Jedi. This was just another in a long string of moral shortcuts, just one more justification for bringing justice to the Mandalorians. But this time, Revan had gone too far. During this period, Mandalorian and Jedi forces clashed on the world of Ver 4 for a period of several weeks. They continued to lose ground, and were ordered to abandon the planet and regroup in a more neutral sector. A young recruit by the name of War Mergen refused the order and instead asked for volunteers, wanting to defend a fortified location that they called the Blood Ridge. Part of Mugen's forces successfully held the ridge for several days, distracting more and more Jedi forces while the rest mounted a counter. The Battle of Blood Ridge, as it would come to be known, was later immortalized in Mandalorian culture, and Mugen's plan, which was sketched out on a piece of leather cut from his tabard, was considered a symbol of courage and determination for many future Mando clans. But as heartwarming as the story was, it would be the last. Republic forces finally moved into Mandalorian space. The Vorzid system was the first to fall, and from there, the Republic split their forces on two separate offenses. The Battle of Lukazak system saw the Republic driven back, but Revan was successful in taking the Stenos and the Elam systems, and from there, the Republic moved on to the Jagus cluster. However, advance was stopped there at the Battle of Jagus, and would end in disaster. Despite the direct presence of Revan and Malak, Cassis Fett still managed to clutch a victory. Revan took a different approach though, and decided to once again copy the Neo Crusaders' tactics, attacking the supply worlds of the Mandalorians. He conquered Althir III, reclaiming the very first world that the Mandos had taken during the initial raids, 16 years earlier at this point. He utterly decimated their ground forces, conquering one of their main industrial holds. But Revan wanted to deal the Mandos a greater blow, retaking Onderon and Duxun. The Mandos' position on the world was too strong, and served as a good staging ground for another attack on the core worlds. A large-scale assault was organized to take Duxun, though the offensive was incredibly costly to the Republic. This was a heavily fortified stronghold. The Neo Crusaders had decades to fortify the moon, with defenses that included minefields, traps, anti-air turrets, and the jungle beasts themselves. Revan would order the deployment of battle droids on the moon, hoping to take out the anti-air turrets, and then his forces, under the command of Mitra Surik, would conduct small unit feints to probe the Mandalorians' defenses. Surik lost most of her men, especially when they charged across a minefield in an attempt to strike at the Mandalorian emplacements, but she carried out Revan's plans nonetheless. The battle lasted for months, as the Mandalorians refused to relent. Revan doggedly continued to hammer at their defenses. This resulted in a massively high casualty count. It was said that 10 Republic soldiers died for every Mando. But ultimately, despite the loss, Revan triumphed and sent the Crusaders packing back into the Outer Rim. The Republic was winning, but not fast enough for Revan's liking. The Mandalorians had caused ceaseless death and destruction. In Revan's mind, they needed to pay. He had fought them long enough to become familiar with their culture, and the Battle of Duxun proved that their spirits were too strong to be put down, even if the Republic won a very lengthy war. They needed to be dealt with, fatally, catastrophically. And if there was any bit of wisdom that Revan learned from his secret studies of the Sith and their way, it was that super weapons were the answer to this puzzle. Revan would enlist the help of a Zabrak scientist by the name of Bao Dur to create a weapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator. To explain how the weapon works, we first have to explain something about hyperspace. Hyperspace is a separate dimension that folds space and time. It is comprised of a system of tunnels that are layered on top of the galaxy. However, despite being a separate dimension, there are things from real space that can have an effect on it. One such powerful effect on hyperspace is wells of gravity. Celestial bodies such as planets and moons have gravitational signatures in hyperspace. These signatures are what are called mass shadows. Calculating routes through hyperspace can be incredibly tricky work because of these mass shadows. If you were to collide with one, you would be pulled straight out of hyperspace and impacted straight onto the surface of whatever planet, star, or moon cast the shadow. So to summarize, this was a machine that had the ability to artificially replicate the gravitational signatures that celestial bodies cast into hyperspace. This causes absolutely devastating gravitational fluxes, those that can be weaponized. Revan continued to drive the Mandalorians further back, while the superweapon was now being actively constructed. After successfully retaking the Liana system, he forced a final showdown with the Neo Crusaders on Malachor V. Revan deployed a massive fleet to the planet as bait for the Mandos to attack. The centerpiece of the trap was the Mass Shadow Generator, which had been placed on the planet's surface. Revan then split his forces into two, giving half to Mitra Surik to lure the Mandalorians into range of the superweapon, and tasking her with the weapon's activation. As Revan predicted, Mandalore the Ultimate took the lure and attacked Malachor V with his full company, throwing everything he had into what he knew would be the final battle. If he could not defeat Revan here, the Neo Crusaders would be done for. However, a small hiccup occurred in Revan's plan when half of the Republic's forces were delayed outside of the Malachor system, being stopped by a Mandalorian scouting party. Once they finally arrived to Malachor V, Ultimate's forces had engaged Surik's fleet. Mandalore saw Revan's reinforcements and realized that defeat was now inevitable, but he then decided to throw an all-or-nothing play, challenging Revan to single combat aboard his flagship. Revan accepted the challenge and boarded the Mandalorian vessel, dueling Ultimate one-on-one. Their fight was as glorious as it was brutal, with Ultimate proving to be an incredibly strong adversary. However, Revan was victorious and struck him a critical blow. Only now, moments from death, did Ultimate come out of the spell placed on him by the Sith. He realized that he had been betrayed. Removing his mask, he explained to Revan how the Sith had manipulated him and the war. To prove his story, Ultimate gave the Jedi the coordinates to the planet of Rekiad, the location where he had helped the Emperor's emissary discover Lord Dramath's tomb. As Mandalore the Ultimate breathed his last, Revan picked up his mask, the symbol of Mandalorian leadership and supremacy. But instead of donning it, Revan took the mask, hiding it, hoping to prevent the next Mandalore from being chosen. With Revan's victory, the Republic forces began to press the Mandalorian fleet even closer to Malachor, but they also suffered major casualties in the process. This prompted Meetra Surik to have Bao-Dur activate the mass shadow generator without the approval of Revan. Meetra feared something had happened to him, and believed that the Republic forces would be destroyed if the weapon wasn't used immediately. Both Revan and Meetra's ships were out of range of the weapon, and they watched in horror as most of the Mandalorian fleet and a large portion of the Republic fleet was drawn towards the planet, directly into the massive gravity vortex. Tens of thousands died as hundreds of vessels collided with Malachor's surface, devastating the once lush world and fracturing its very core. The Republic suffered catastrophic casualties, though nowhere near as many as the Mandalorians did. The sheer number of death and suffering caused a substantial wound in the Force to form. Surik was the closest Jedi to the vortex that survived, and she instinctively severed her own connection to the Force to avoid being killed by the resulting shockwave. In the wake of the total annihilation, the remaining Neo Crusaders and Mandos transmitted their unconditional surrender to the Republic, thus officially concluding the Mandalorian Wars, but at great cost. The Mandalorian Wars are one of the most frustrating and unfair wars in the Republic's history, and its outcome, while the Jedi won, was one of their worst. The fallout of the war would change everything. Although Revan and Malak were hailed as heroes by the Republic, they enraged the Jedi Council and demanded they return to Coruscant and face judgment for their actions. The two Jedi, disillusioned with the Order, refused, instead vanishing into the unknown regions. Revan sought to locate Mandalore's mysterious coordinates to learn who had manipulated him and the war. In the process, he hid Mandalore's mask, keeping the remaining Crusaders from ever reforming. The Mandalorian clans would fracture and dissolve without their leader. Some stayed together, but many spread out into the galaxy to become mercenaries and bounty hunters. Generations after this war, Mandalorians would speak of Revan with honor, deeming him a worthy foe despite the damage that he did to them and their society, proving that they respect warrior culture above everything. Meetra Surik was the only one of them that chose to return to the Jedi High Council and face punishment for her actions during the war. Meetra was stripped of all titles as a Jedi and exiled from the Republic for being an accomplice to Revan. Another Jedi exiled from the Order was Revan's master, Kreia, who was not only blamed for encouraging Revan's actions, but for being involved in the training of many Jedi who joined the Revanchists. As we know, the two Jedi heroes of the war would eventually return to known space, this time calling themselves Darth Revan and Darth Malak, to restart the Sith Empire and instigate what is known as the Jedi Civil War. But worse still, the wound in the Force caused by the devastation of Malachor V focused into a single being, a man, transforming him into the entity known as Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. The Republic may have emerged barely victorious. There were no winners in the Mandalorian Wars. It is one of the bleakest conflicts in all of Star Wars lore. It began with the complete apathy of the Republic, resulting in them getting absolutely run roughshod by the Mandos. Even the Jedi High Council didn't do anything out of fear of another war. A charismatic young Jedi ended up having to take charge, doing everything in his power to save the Republic. It ultimately cost him his life, his allegiance in the Force, and the lives of tens of thousands of beings to make it happen. The Jedi High Council refused to learn from their mistakes, leading the Republic to suffer yet another unavoidable war when Darth Revan returned, planting the seeds for another, greater evil, Darth Nihilus, a being that nearly caused the destruction of the Jedi as we know it. It's a real shame that in the lore that this is one of the great wars that gets skipped over, because it plays such a pivotal role in galactic history moving forward. During the research of this video, we discovered that the Mandalorian Wars was actually the very last era being fleshed out by Legends continuity before it was officially shut down by Disney. The Knights of the Old Republic comic ran between 2012 and 2014, making it one of the final Legends projects in production ever. In our opinion, this makes the Mandalorian Wars even more special, because it holds so much value both in and out of universe. But of course, tell us your thoughts on this, my friends. Would you want to see the era of the Mandalorian Wars pick back up in the comics, or perhaps games? Also, are there other eras that you would like us to see make documentaries about in the future? And as always, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, especially in these longer form videos. There is no channel without you guys, so we are sincerely, eternally grateful. But as always, may the Force be with you, and have a phenomenal day.